While Ethiopia managed to be the only African nation to retain its independence, European attempts to conquer the nation had been attempted. The Italians attempted in 1895 but failed, and ever since that failure had wanted to exact revenge. However, tensions back at home prevented action against the state for decades to come, but in 1935, 40 years after their first war, Italy would once again invade the Ethiopian nation, with the goal of annexing it into the Italian colonial empire. This was the Second Italo-Italian War. The victory of the Black Ethiopians over the White Italians in 1895 caused a so-called deep national trauma in Italy, as the supposedly inferior Ethiopians were viewed as incapable of defeating the Italians, and Italy was the only European nation to lose a major war with an African country during the scramble for Africa. In 1906, a secret Anglo-Italian-French agreement had signed Ethiopia to the Italian sphere of influence, and the Italian military had prepped invasion plans starting in 1908. World War I and the immediate aftermath kind of got in the way. Even with the fascist regime under Mussolini coming into power in the 1920s, the nation lacked the ability to project enough power towards an Ethiopian invasion, as they were still facing major problems in Libya and suppressing native unrest. The issue that drove the two nations to war once again was the question about the border. The two nations had signed a treaty in 1928 that detailed the line between Italian East Africa and Ethiopia. However, a fort outside of Walwal was still occupied by Italians years later. On November the 23rd of 1934, an Anglo-Ethiopian border commission for grazing lands in the area requested to be able to camp around the fort, which the Italians refused. Following this, both sides, with the British leaving, began to gather reinforcements, with the Ethiopians numbering around 1,500 against 500 Italians within 2 weeks. On December the 5th, shots ran out. The Italians were supported by an armored car and bomber aircraft. The bombs missed, but machine gun fire from the car caused around 110 Ethiopian casualties. 30 to 50 Italians were also killed. This incident led to the so-called Abyssinian Crisis at the League of Nations. On September the 4th, the League of Nations exonerated both parties for the incident. On October the 3rd, the Italians invaded Ethiopia with around 500,000 men. The Ethiopians, in response, managed to raise around 750,000 men, but only a quarter of them were properly trained and equipped, with some units still armed with bows and spears, while many more were equipped with pre-1900 firearms. The nation's air force was essentially non-existent, and outside of 4 World War I tanks and a few anti-tank rifles, it had no way to combat the nearly 200 Italian tanks earmarked for the invasion. Britain and France put a large amount of pressure, both politically and economically, against Italy to halt the invasion. Unlike League sanctions against Germany, which simply wouldn't have worked, Italy's economy was rather reliant on heavy trade with the Western powers. A pact was reached with the heads of state that would give Italy the eastern quarter of Abyssinia, while granting Ethiopia a rather poor corridor to the Red Sea. Mussolini stalled the best he could, trying to give his army enough time to fully occupy the nation. But the advance was pretty slow, and Ethiopia is a rather large nation. The advance had a number of issues, however. The Christmas counteroffensive launched by the Ethiopians managed to push the Italians back several miles, with the important cities of Dembagwina and Tekesi being retaken, an entire wing of the Italian army heavily damaged. However, this was short-lived. At the turn of the year, reinforced with 2 full corps and the authorization to use chemical weapons, the Italians resumed the advance, inflicting heavy losses all along the line, and effectively neutered the Ethiopian Northern Army at the Battle of Amda Aradam in mid-February. Battles at Temdin, Shire, and Mecca all resulted in Italian victories, and the Ethiopian army resorted to guerrilla warfare in the north to beat the materially and often numerically superior Italian army, all while fighting continued on in the south of the nation. Even with this, however, the capital Addis Ababa was viewed as no longer suitable to protect, and the emperor fled to Britain with the nation's gold reserve, while Prince Regent Emir Haile Salih, a cousin of the emperor, continued to fight, with a new capital in Gore. Major battles didn't occur following this, as the Ethiopian army merely staged guerrilla warfare against the occupying Italians even up until World War II. The nation wasn't occupied, and it was a significant drain on the Italian military, economy, and political power as a whole, all of which would be lost in 1941 with the East African Campaign, but that is a story for another time. The video. If there's a topic that you would like me to cover in the future, write so down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time.